As a constitutional law attorney, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Good evening. I'm Jenna Ellis, and as Joe Biden continues to deal with issues of his mental competency and refuses for the first time in presidential history a mental competency test, he's also dealing with the special counsel's report and now an issue that the House Judiciary Committee is subpoenaing from his ghostwriter. This is coming from The Hill. The headline says, House Judiciary requests information from Biden's ghostwriter. The House Judiciary Committee has asked the ghostwriter of President Biden's memoir to turn over any recordings and notes from his conversation with the president. The letter to Mark Zwanitzer, who helped Biden write Promise Me, Dad, and Promises to Keep, asks the ghostwriter to turn over audio recordings and transcripts he has of their conversations. The request comes after special counsel Robert Hur said Biden read aloud passages from notebooks he kept during his time in office, including on 3 occasions where Biden shared passages dealing with classified information with Zwanitzer. This quote coming from Chair Jim Jordan, who wrote in his letter this, quote, Special Counsel Hur's report unequivocally provides that during many of the interviews with his ghostwriter, Biden read from his notebooks nearly verbatim, sometimes for an hour or more at a time, and at least 3 times Biden read classified notes from national security meetings to you, the ghostwriter, nearly verbatim. Based on the information in Special Counsel Hur's report, President Biden's assertion that he never shared classified information with you appears to be false. Well, the ghostwriter is unfortunately unlikely to be able to comply with this request because apparently he deleted all of those audio recordings that the special counsel's team was able to go back and get from his tech. But this has caused some members of Congress, including on the House Judiciary, to raise the question, what is he hiding? Representative Dan Bishop said this last night with Greta Van Susteren.
Obviously, it's important to get a list of the information that, from the ghostwriter so you get a complete picture. But what struck me in the letter, first of all, in the letter from the chairman to the ghostwriter, says you took steps to conceal some of these recordings and transcripts. That sort of suggests something a little more sinister than just putting some documents aside. Do you know anything more about that?
Well, only what Robert Hur, the special counsel, reported or set forth in the report, Greta, that some of the recordings on his phone, I believe it was, or other devices had been deleted once he learned that a special counsel had been appointed to handle the matter. And that obviously begs questions about his credibility and whether he was fully cooperative. Certainly, he seems to have provided transcripts and other materials so that the special counsel could determine that indeed Vice President Biden, when he was vice president or subsequently, read substantial amounts verbatim to his ghostwriter. And then, of course, we have an impeachment inquiry before our committee. And what Chairman Jordan has done is recognize that President Biden called a press conference, went before the country, and guaranteed that he did not do what the special counsel said. So it places Mark Zwanitzer, the ghostwriter's information, testimony, documents, recordings, and so forth, directly an issue in the impeachment inquiry we have. So Chairman Jordan has issued a letter requiring his appearance to testify in a deposition or a transcribed interview and the production of all of the materials that are in question because they have a great bearing on our impeachment inquiry now that the president has gone before the nation to deny what the special counsel said he did.
So this is, in my opinion, the top story in the nation right now, that Joe Biden has been found by the special counsel's report to be basically mentally incompetent to stand trial. This is generally a finding that's reserved for an arbiter at the trial court level. And so, in my opinion, I'm wondering why the special counsel didn't just go ahead and indict him or charge him and then let that issue be determined at trial, because people under the law are generally presumed to be fit, even children. So when I was a prosecutor, for example, I remember having a 4-year-old that was called to testify in a certain case. And of course, the defense counsel suggested that a 4-year-old can't possibly testify to the truth of the matter. And so there was a hearing, and a judge had to determine, does a 4-year-old understand the difference between a truth and a lie? And maybe not on a level of some deep philosophical explanation and some deep metaphysical analysis, but even a child, even my nephews who are 3 and 5, understand when someone is lying to them versus when someone is telling the truth. So it's very easy to go into court and say, hey, I'm wearing blue right now. If I told you that I'm wearing pink, is that true or is it false? Even children know that. If Joe Biden can't even answer those questions when he has his finger on the nuclear trigger buttons, that should raise 25th Amendment questions, not just impeachment. Impeachment is a remedy that I think that the Republicans absolutely need to exercise, and they need to exercise it quickly. Why haven't they impeached Joe Biden? Why are they waiting so long once they've had the majority for a year? Now, impeachment does require high crimes and misdemeanors. It can't just be an allegation of mental incompetency. But at the same time, there needs to be questions to the cabinet under the 25th Amendment. Why aren't you exercising any of these provisions? And why is Joe Biden, on the one hand, allowed to skate from all of the judicial accountability under the auspices of being, this very well-meaning but old man who can't really remember stuff like the special counsel's report says. But then on the other hand, he's still in office. He's still allegedly running for president. And does anyone care that mental competency is a big deal here and that he's declining to say that he is actually fit through a cognitive test? The press secretary is laughing this off, suggesting that, she can't even keep up with him. But someone, I think it was Joe Concha, who actually posted on Twitter that Biden's calendar for last Tuesday literally mentioned lunch with the vice president, and then at like 2:45, a briefing that he had with the vice president also sitting there, probably taking notes, probably has to recall certain details of that meeting because Joe Biden can't remember. These things are very critical, especially for voters in the 2024 election. If Joe Biden ends up being on that ticket, I don't really think that he will. I think the Democrats are going to replace him with someone else. Don't voters have a right to know whether he's mentally competent? Now, there's no law currently in place, but isn't this what Congress is supposed to do with legislative oversight authority? Why has no member of Congress suggested that maybe we need to legislate around it? Maybe we need to get together and have 2/3 of the majority of both houses actually pass a constitutional amendment or amend the 25th Amendment so that Congress can take action. These are things that are necessary to national security interests. So we're going to talk about this more with my next guest coming up right after this. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1-ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. So what really are the options that America has when we look at the mental competencies, or maybe lack thereof, of Joe Biden? Joining me now is Ron Coleman, who is an attorney and the host of his podcast, Coleman Nation. And Ron, I really am frustrated with the GOP. They've impeached Mayorkas, but they now are continuing just this inquiry with Joe Biden. After the special counsel's report, how much more evidence do they really need before they push for at least a mental competency test or impeachment or something along congressional oversight lines?
Well, I don't see how impeachment is an option. Impeachment is the purpose of impeachment is to remove an office holder for high crimes and misdemeanors. It isn't a crime to be stupid or to be demented. In fact, it seems to be a job requirement for many positions in Washington. In terms of the inquiry, I think the only reason there's delay, well, look, I don't want to say the only reason there's delay. There's plenty of good reason for delay. There's also not such good reasons for delay. The good reason is that we're in uncharted territory here. The 25th Amendment was a very obvious response to the Kennedy assassination. As you will recall, not that you'll recall when it happened, even I have an alibi for November 1963, but it was based on the idea that if Kennedy had survived the assassination attempt, it had been impaired because it had obviously blown his head up. There should be a constitutional way to remove him from office. And also, I imagine lawmakers recalled what had happened with Woodrow Wilson, who had a stroke and whose wife pretty much was the president of the United States for a number of years. What Congress and what the states, when they ratified the 25th Amendment, didn't do was put any sort of procedure into place. I mean, there's a procedure for taking action, but there isn't really let's put it this way, the Constitution and the laws of the United States have always operated on a certain assumption. What was that assumption? That the people, that although there might be bad actors, that fundamentally the institutions and the people who are in positions of power in those institutions will act with a level of responsibility to something other than political or personal concerns. That there's no getting away from that, except that we've gotten away from it entirely. So the Republicans, I think, are trying to figure out what the political angle is here. Biden, I mean, what's extraordinary here is that anyone from the Justice Department weighed in on this the way they did. Unless you want to take the position, which in and of itself is not irrational, that this was the plan more or less all along, and that they had hoped to slot in Kamala Harris, and then probably realized just how cringe she would be as a candidate. I don't know what would have changed other than the obvious increase, or well, let's just say the obvious decrease in President Biden's capacity. But it wasn't so hot 2 years ago.
These things, Ron, are going back even to. Yeah, I mean, some of these things are going back even, to well before he got elected. I mean, some of these things like the ghostwriter and some of the notes that now the House GOP Oversight Committee is and the Judiciary Committee are subpoenaing, I mean, go back well before the election. I mean, is this something that voters have a right to be aware of? And should Joe Biden take a competency test? I mean, he's the first president in U.S. history that's declined to do this.
So but there's no constitutional requirement that just as there's no requirement that and you know this very well from having been there at the time, there's no requirement in the law, much less in the Constitution, that a president submit a financial disclosure the disclosure form, yes, but the personal income taxes, that has always been something that is done for political reasons, but it was never required, and President Trump, I think, quite appropriately declined to release his. There is no requirement for a competency test. The next move is the vice president's, and she will do as she is told when she is told it. That is just as that has historically been Joe Biden's role as president and as vice president, that's his vice president's role also. We're not there. If Harris doesn't make that move, and again, she's not going to make it unless she's told to make it by the Democratic leadership, the process stops dead. Now, in terms of what you just raised, in terms of actual high crimes and misdemeanors, it is problematic. In other words, the classified information. It is problematic that the Justice Department has declined to prosecute. I don't think it's constitutionally problematic. It's politically problematic. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the Justice Department, that Congress has to defer to the Justice Department with respect to impeachment. Not only that, the Justice Department really issued an opinion saying, if it weren't for the fact that the old man has lost it, we would have to probably, they didn't go as far as to say this, but his conduct was unlawful. Since Comey,
and do you think, Ron, that it was not a good call on the special counsel's part to make the determination of mental competency as a matter of law and declining to prosecute? I mean, shouldn't they have charged him and then let a judge sort that out as to whether he should have stood trial?
Absolutely, and of course, if it had been Trump or any Republican, you'd have to be out of your mind to believe that they would have taken this approach. But that does still leave me with the question of how could it be worth it for them to have opined about his inability to defend himself?
Yeah, and we're going to have to leave it there, Ron. But, these are all really important questions, and I think it shouldn't be political. This is for the American people. With the 2024 election rapidly approaching, election integrity is still a very big question, and it shouldn't be a partisan issue. The Public Interest Legal Foundation has a lawsuit in Michigan that is concerning the voter rolls. This is part of their 6-minute video that you really need to see on over 26,000 dead voters that are still on the rolls inexplicably in Michigan. Watch this.
We're here in Detroit today investigating deceased registrants on Michigan's voter roll to provide Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, with proof that she just cannot refute that these people have passed away some 2 decades ago and need to be removed from the voter roll.
The Public Interest Legal Foundation is a nonpartisan 501c3 charity with a mission to clean voter rolls and preserve the constitutional framework of American elections. Our team is comprised of some of the country's best election lawyers that sue election officials across the country. My name is Lauren Biss. I am the Director of Communications for the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Unfortunately, Michigan has a history of errors and chaos in its election administration. The state has colossal problems on their voter rolls. These errors are important because voter rolls are the most essential election integrity document. The voter roll tells election officials who is eligible to vote. Each error on the voter rolls is a vulnerability in our elections. The Public Interest Legal Foundation notified Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and local election officials about errors on the voter roll years ago. We even put out a report detailing thousands of errors on Michigan's voter rolls, including foreign nationals registered to vote, people registered more than once, and registrants with implausible birth years.
J. Christian Adams is the president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation that is suing the Secretary of State in Michigan, and he joins me now. So, Christian, this is a really important problem.
And it's one that's easy to fix. That's the worst part, Jenna, is Secretary Benson has known about these issues for years. She got the names from us years ago of the 27,000 plus dead voters and has done nothing about it. In fact, has dug in. Doesn't like the icky conservative group that is telling her she's not doing her job correctly, and has really done nothing but fight and spend taxpayer dollars to keep the status quo of broken rolls.
Well, so where are we at in this process? If we have this approximately 26,000 dead voters that are still on the rolls, are they receiving ballots? What's happening with those ballots come November 2024?
Yes, some are. And in fact, some of these people have been dead, Jenna, since the 1990s, like 1995. They've been dead on the rolls. I mean, these are multi-decade long deads. If you watch the whole video, you'll see Lauren Biss goes through a tour of graveyards in Michigan to actually go to the graves of these voters. Something that really has never been done before is like, let's go find where they're buried. And so it's outrageous that even in the light of knowing that there's a problem, the Secretary of State of Michigan resists fixing it.
Yeah, this is incredible. And this really should not be a partisan issue. Yet when we talk about election integrity, so many Democrats just want to say, well, this is fine. And they use a guise of suggesting that somehow conservatives are just creating it to be more impossible to vote or harder to vote. And yet all we really want and should want as Americans is for only the people who are actually eligible by law to vote to have access to the ballot.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Congress decided this was important in 1993 when they passed motor voter. We're just enforcing the will of Congress. But yet Secretary Benson and her allies among election administration officials will report this very segment as misinformation, right? That we can't talk about the problems. We can't reveal the science, the data of dead people on the rolls because that's misinformation. And they'll, call their friends in big tech to stifle speech that draws attention to these problems. So it's even worse than having broken rolls. It's even worse than having election officials who don't fix it. Then they report you and label you as part of the problem if you talk about it.
Yeah, and there's so many lawyers that are going through bar complaints, for example, simply for election integrity issues that stemmed from the 2020 election. And, this type of lawfare has been increased, I think, just since there was national attention on the 2020 election. But moving ahead to 2024, why isn't the federal government then enforcing its own law? Since, as you mentioned, Christian, this is federal law that Michigan really isn't complying with.
So I wrote a whole book about this and went on the New York Times bestseller list in 2011. It's called Injustice. And it talks about when I was at the Justice Department in the voting section in early 09, Tom Perez, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, convened a meeting in the voting section when he announced that, it was Julie Fernandez, who was his deputy. She announced, I was in the room, that cleaning voter rolls was not going to be a priority of the Obama administration, that we're not going to enforce federal law that required cleaning of voter rolls. That's why I got in this business in the private sector, to do what the Justice Department refuses to do. And even during the Trump administration, the bureaucrats ran the asylum. The longtime careerists would refuse to enforce the law also. And Eric Dreiband, who was the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights that President Trump put there, he had no control because all of the lunatics were running the asylum. He literally didn't have a lawyer that would sign pleadings in the bowels of the Justice Department. They refused. There's a mutiny. They refused to do the things that the presidential appointee wanted to do. And so that's why the law hasn't been enforced for almost 20 years out of the Justice Department, is because of ideological opposition to the voter roll cleanup provisions of the statute.
This is just par for the course with the deep state, and we're so grateful that you and the Public Interest Legal Foundation are on it. You can find that full video at Public Legal Interest, is it .org, I think is the website, and see this full 6-minute video. And in just about the last 30 seconds I have with you, Christian, how do people get involved in their own state if they want to see these voter rolls cleaned up?
Yeah, they have a right to see him. We've been litigating that. We just won a First Circuit case out of Maine, went to the Federal Appeals Court. You have a right to it. If you want to see that case, it'll give you a lot of info. You can get it at publicinterestlegal.org.
Excellent. All right. Well, election integrity is going to still be a huge issue coming up in 2024. We'll stay on it. A shooting at the Chiefs Super Bowl parade has left one dead and multiple others injured. And all of these types of headlines always raise the question about gun control for the left. And Gavin Newsom, governor of California, continues to push an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would restrict access to firearms. So what really is the conservative position, and how do we advocate for the constitutional right, the protected right to keep and bear arms, while still maintaining an understanding and awareness that these types of crimes should not ever be committed in the first place? Joining me now is Auron MacIntyre, who is a commentator on The Blaze. And Auron, this is one of those things where I just think from a constitutional and conservative standpoint, the Second Amendment is in place because Congress has no ability under Article 1, Section 8 to restrict firearms or anything like the quote unquote common sense gun control that the left suggests. This is just a redundancy protection to say, yeah, we can keep and bear arms. And it seems like what the Democrats want to do is assume that everyone is dangerous and is going to wield our guns in mass shootings unless the government somehow vets you and allows you to carry, which in their utopian ideal is going to be virtually no one.
Every time something like this happens, there's always this rush. If the person who perpetrated the crime was an ideological enemy of the left, then the problem becomes their ideology. If they were an ally of the left, then the problem is one of gun control. What's really clear is that no matter what, the left is interested in making sure that those that oppose them aren't able to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Their constant push is to make sure that they are the ones that dictate who is able to bear an arm. The people who are often perpetrating these crimes do so with illegal firearms. They're already violating the laws that are on the books. However, the left does not want to enforce the current laws that we have. They do not want law and order because that goes ahead and punishes many of the groups that they think of as client classes inside the United States. And so instead, they come up with these ridiculous ideas of common sense gun control, which is simply an excuse to go ahead and grab the guns of the law-abiding citizens who are less likely to support their political agenda.
Yeah, so well said. And it's so true when you look at the differences and to the left, the distinctions between the motivations and especially the identities of some of these shooters. There's a great Babylon Bee headline that said that, we can't really understand the motivations and the police don't know yet until we understand the race and gender of the alleged shooter. And that's exactly it, because no matter what happens, the left is always going to frame this as somehow we need to have more propping up of the transgender LGBT community like the Nashville shooter, or this is the lone white American male, and therefore that lone shooter shouldn't have had access to AR-15s anyway. So we need more red flag laws in order to prevent anyone that they think is a danger in their eyes from even accessing firearms. And to me, red flag laws, I've never seen one that I think is constitutionally viable. It's always a presumptive that the government can just come in and grab your guns, and then you have to prove that you are fit to whatever their standard is in order to exercise your constitutionally protected right. And that's not something that we should ever allow for in America. And so how should conservatives talk about this? Because I get the question so often, like, why do you care so much about your guns?
Well, the key is to understand the motivation of the left. As you said, red flag laws are just another example of how the left use the manipulation of procedural outcomes to create exceptions for their side and to punish their political enemies. They use these kind of laws. The more red tape that they can put around the ownership, the constitutional right that you have, protect yourself, the more they're able to manipulate that system, and the more they can create exceptions for those that they think are on their side. All we have to do is look back to the riots of 2020 and the way that the law has been applied there, as opposed to something like January 6th, right? We could say these are similar crimes, they should be handled similarly, but instead, one group is getting away almost completely scot-free, while the other one is treated like someone in a Soviet gulag. And they're trying to do the same thing with guns here. We need to understand that this is not a good faith argument. They're not really interested in people's safety. They're not really interested in the actual meaning of the Second Amendment. That meaning is very clear. Heller has been on the book for a long time, and still Democrats continuously violate it willfully because they know they can get away with it. The Democrats are not in a good faith argument about our Second Amendment rights and how they should be upheld. And so I think the key thing that many conservatives should be thinking about is local action protecting their Second Amendment rights. When Illinois attempted to restrict gun ownership, many county sheriffs there simply refused to go ahead and enact the restrictions because they violated the Second Amendment. People like your county sheriff can counteract dictates that come down from the total state in Washington, D.C. that violate your rights. It's not just about having those protections written down. It's about having the people who can actually protect them on the local level.
Yeah, 100%. And this is something that I think the state and local legislators and governors need to significantly be aware of. And this is why state sovereignty is such a big issue, because even though we do have good opinions from the U.S. Supreme Court, like you mentioned, the Heller decision, when states just don't go along with it, like New York, some of the end up getting to the U.S. Supreme Court, we need to make sure that there is good legislation in each of the states that does protect this right. And so we're seeing, that some legislation on the federal level, like the right to constitutionally carry and that kind of reciprocity between the states, that's something that Representative Thomas Massie has pushed for a while. But it seems like this isn't really going anywhere because of the vast partisanship that this issue perpetuates.
Absolutely. They're going to continue to drive this forward. I don't think we're going to see a resolution where the left goes ahead and realizes that these constitutional rights absolutely have to be upheld, or that there's superior arguments being made by people on the right. They're going to continue to pursue this agenda. They're going to continue to see every one of these incidents as an excuse to be politically minded, to go ahead and divide the country, to push forward their agenda. And like I said, the resolution of that, unfortunately, is probably not accumulating enough statistics or putting out a good enough campaign of explaining the rationale. Instead, it's effective political action that goes ahead and binds the hands of the left in places like municipalities and counties and on the state level that allow us to go ahead and protect our constitutional rights, no matter what agenda the left is advancing.
Yeah, really well said. Auron MacIntyre from The Blaze, appreciate your time today. And I think that for conservatives, we need to make sure that we understand that the presumption in the Constitution is that everyone is fit to exercise their constitutionally protected rights. We cannot give away that presumption and have to go to a court of law and somehow argue that we are fit and have the presumption that we are unfit. And so the way that we articulate our rights under the Constitution and we advocate for them absolutely has to be from a basis that our rights come from God, our creator, not our government. They're pre-political. Donald Trump's first criminal trial is set to start on March 25th after a judge in New York denied a motion to continue earlier today. And this raises the question of whether presidential immunity will attach to any of these decisions. Will Trump get kicked off the ballot? There are so many interesting questions, and whether you love or hate Trump, you're supporting him or not, these are questions that demand constitutional and appropriate answers for the future. So joining me now to discuss is my good friend Will Chamberlain, who is an attorney and general counsel at the Article 3 Project. And Will, let's start first with just the political. So President Trump is looking at sitting in a defendant's chair, at least starting on March 25th. And if the left has their way, he's going to continue to sit in that chair somewhere in the country through the duration of the general election cycle. Does this help or hurt Republicans?
I mean, I think it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, I think it's a bad look to be putting a presidential candidate in a defendant's chair so much. And there is a very kind of coordinated nature to all of these indictments, where you had about 4 indictments in 4 different jurisdictions in a little less than 4 months. So that, I think, plenty of people on the Trump side are going to be absolutely indignant. On the other hand, there are going to be some low information voters that think that, well, if he's on trial, he must have done something wrong, or there is in fact a crime here. So it's hard to say, honestly. I think on net, it probably hurts him. I think on net, there are probably more people who would struggle to vote for the guy who's constantly sitting in a defendant's chair than there are who would be indignant and angry about all the lawfare against him. But it's hard to say in terms of being like a political prognosticator.
Yeah, and I think that polls have certainly reflected that a lot of people are suggesting that if Trump is ultimately convicted of any single offense in all of these indictments, then they would likely not vote for him, regardless of who the Democrat nominee ultimately becomes. And so this then turns to the question of presidential immunity, and the DOJ actually sought review of this issue before President Trump did, so that they could expedite this D.C. indictment. And that was argued in the D.C. circuit. Now, Trump has appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. What were your thoughts on presidential immunity overall, and what should the Supreme Court decide? I think they will take up this case.
So it actually is somewhat important that there be some form of presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts. Because, the president is the commander in chief of the military. He has the ability to order drone strikes, assassinations, just as one obvious measure. But he also has control of all the instrumentalities of the federal government. And at some point, those powers would butt into generally applicable criminal laws. A good example would be Barack Obama launched a drone strike in Yemen that killed a teenage American citizen. In a world where he had no immunity for official acts, he could be prosecuted tomorrow for murder. That doesn't seem right as a matter of law. There's a separation of powers issue there, too, because, the judicial isn't supposed to come in and be able to just tell the president what to do. In fact, that's actually a big part of the law. You'll notice that when people sue the executive branch, they sue executive branch officials, but they don't sue the president himself. He's not named, and there aren't injunctions entered against the president. That's because there's a separation of powers issue that says that, the judicial and the executive are two separate branches. The executive is manifested effectively in a single man. And if the judicial branch can just order him to do stuff and make him comply, then really they're superior to the executive. So, he may not be the president anymore, but the underlying logic still applies. If once he leaves office, suddenly all his old official acts that he took as president are now subject to judicial supervision and prosecution, that really creates serious separation of powers problems.
Yeah, and certainly would create a chilling effect on the decision making and probably the openness of advisors to advise the president, because this would always be in the back of their mind of what is the political opposition going to do when immunity lapses. This was, to me, the most insane part, frankly, of the D.C. Circuit's opinion, is to suggest that when a president is in office, then presidential immunity covers official acts. But once he leaves office, then immunity lapses, rather than drawing the distinction that I think is more clear in precedent like Clinton v. Jones, for example, that acts that are in a private capacity, you have civil liability. You also should have criminal liability. But for official acts under color of your office, that should be the demarcation and the bright line here to say that, no, there is presidential immunity for those official acts, and that doesn't lapse, that's into perpetuity because it is a political policy decision, rather than having this notion that immunity lapses. So with the current composition of the Supreme Court, if in fact they do grant cert, they do hear this case, they don't have to, but if they do, which I hope that they do, I think that they will, where do you see the Supreme Court going with these questions?
I think they're honestly going to agree with the Donald Trump and his lawyers about what the proper line is, which is to say you're going to have immunity from criminal prosecution for those acts that you are not impeached and convicted for. Right. That is the remedy that the Constitution provides impeachment. That's the way in which presidents are not above the law. They can be impeached for bad acts. But absent that explicit constitutional remedy, I think the court's going to say, you know what, there's criminal immunity here because everything, the alternative is just not good. It's not good as a policy matter because it means that presidents will constantly be looking over their shoulder and worried about a potential partisan prosecution in the future. And it's not right as a separation of powers matter either. And I think the big problem with the D.C. Circuit opinion. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and really quickly, though, let's get to the Ballot case as well, because that one was argued in the U.S. Supreme Court. We only have about 30 seconds here, but your thought on what the court will do after listening to that oral argument.
Very likely an 8-1 or a 9-0 in favor of Donald Trump. The Supreme Court, it might not like Trump very much, but it likes states' rights even less. And the idea, they were very, very hesitant, even the liberals, the idea that the 14th Amendment grants states the right to reject a federal candidate, because the 14th Amendment was all about constraining the states after the Civil War and during Reconstruction.
Yeah, and I think you have a much more positive outlook on the leftist judges, I think, than I do. I would be surprised to see it 8-1-9-0. Maybe on some narrow grounds. I hope that is ultimately the case, because all of these things concern what the law calls the principle of ex ante, or the precedent value. This doesn't just concern Donald Trump. This concerns America. So Will Chamberlain, always really appreciate your analysis and insights, and you can find him at the Article 3 Project on Twitter and social media. They do really, really good work. So thanks so much for joining. That is all the time that we have today for the Salem News Channel. And I hope that you will follow us on social media, and you can always reach me and all of my opinions on social media at Jenna Ellis ESQ, wherever you find social media. And I will see you with more top news and headlines from a conservative perspective tomorrow night. As you know, my friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of their life. He didn't stop by simply creating the best pillow. Mike created the Giza Dream bed sheets. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, which is crucial for my busy schedule. Mike found the world's best cotton. It is ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's Giza sheets come with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. The Giza Dream Sheets come in a variety of sizes and colors. Mike's latest incredible deal is the sale of the year. For a limited time, you will receive 50% off the Giza Dream Sheets. You will also receive a set for as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com, click on the radio podcast square, and use the promo code Jenna. There you will find not only this amazing offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, which I have and I love, the MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and now even flannel sheets and so much more. We definitely need flannel sheets for as crazy as all of this weather has been lately. So go to mypillow.com and make sure you use the promo code Jenna, or call 1-800-564-8475. That's 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna.